Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A 60-year-old Lethbridge man is sentenced to life in prison for killing his wife last year. U.S. and Israeli government officials are meeting to discuss a potential ceasefire, which would allow for more humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. And we hear from a Lethbridge military veteran who discusses the war in Gaza and the importance of wearing a poppy leading up to Remembrance Day.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A Lethbridge man was sentenced to life in prison or 25 years for killing his wife last year. 60-year-old David Ragland pleaded guilty to one count of second-degree murder and will not be eligible for parole for 13 and a half years. The court heard that Ragland stabbed his wife Shelley at their home on December 27th of 2022 while their grandchildren were playing nearby. Crown Prosecutor Michael Fox said over the 3-year period prior to her death, Shelley Ragland had been using illegal drugs, which led to a number of arguments. Fox said the husband described his relationship with his wife as being toxic. Now, following the stabbing, Ragland called 911 to report the crime. In addition to his sentence, Ragland must provide his DNA for the National DNA Data Bank and is prohibited from possessing weapons for the rest of his life. Well, it appears as though Alberta is receiving more doctors. According to the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta, 255 physicians have signed on to practice in our province over the last 4 months. Government officials say 248 physicians and surgeons have also chosen to remain in Alberta after completing their training. Health Minister Adriana LaGrange says a big reason for the increase in doctors is the government committing to a record-breaking $2 billion towards primary health care in Budget 2023. LaGrange says funding is going towards creating a primary health care division, an Indigenous division within the Health Ministry, creating a new payment model for family physicians, and reducing the administrative burden for primary care providers and their teams. Many Albertans are finding it really tough paying their bills these days, especially with the high electricity rates. Well, the province's changes are coming to help make life a little more affordable. Electricity rates have gone from being some of the lowest in the country to some of the highest. Government officials say the reforms they're looking into would ensure ample natural gas-generated electricity is brought onto the grid to ensure prices are pushed down and Albertans can keep their lights on. During her throne speech this week, Lieutenant Governor Salma Lakhani says the province will ensure that our electricity market is free from market manipulation. She says it's very important that Albertans are not left with unaffordable rates under what is being termed a regulated rate option.
It is the Alberta government's position that every Albertan must have access to affordable and reliable electricity no matter the weather or time of day, and this government will not permit misguided federal policies to risk the safety and prosperity of Alberta.
Canada's Public Health Agency is refusing to say how it lost $150 million in taxpayer money for an unfulfilled contract with an undisclosed vendor last year. Questions such as, who was the contract with? What was it for? And why was it unfulfilled? All questions that remain unanswered by the federal government. The Parliamentary Budget Officer says the government's lack of transparency is incomprehensible. Now, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation agrees. Chris Sims says Canadian taxpayers need answers now.
Number one, $150 million. Just think about the taxes that you pay, your income taxes, and now add all of that up and picture it going poof in a puff of smoke. So that's bad enough to not be accountable for it. But then even at the committee level, to refuse to produce documents to explain where the money went, that is just incomprehensible. And taxpayers from all political stripes should be demanding accountability.
Kevin Page, who's the CEO of the Institute of Fiscal Studies and Democracy, says the $150 million is a large write-off for the government, and it seems wrong that the agency is refusing to answer questions as to how taxpayer money has been spent or written off. Members of the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights took their opposition of Bill C-21, the Trudeau government's gun ban bill, to Ottawa. The group's CEO testified before the Senate Committee on National Security. Rod Giltaca says what the government is wanting to move forward with is just wrong for legal, law-abiding gun owners.
we heard an official from Public Safety reveal that the Liberal government's Bill C-21 would effectively end ownership of handguns in Canada in around 50 years. They had an actual number. And that will be done by confiscating with no compensation legally acquired handguns from the widows and family members of gun owners as they die. That is the targeted destruction of an entire culture involving 650,000 Canadians, including 450,000 who are actively involved. A community built over generations in this country, and that was something pretty extraordinary to hear. Now, some might wonder, well, how do you justify something like this? The government should have to justify something like that, but we'll come back to that. The Toronto Police Service tells us that 97% of actual crime guns, now that's important, actual crime guns, come from the United States.
Jeanette Rocher is in now with a quick peek at our weather forecast. Jeanette, more clouds rolled into southwestern Alberta today, and some regions even saw light showers.
Yeah, including right here in Lethbridge, and how those showers could continue on into tonight, as we're looking at a 30% chance of overnight showers. Better rain than snow, though, right? But of course, with that overnight low of -4, with a wind chill factor of -10, who knows what we'll wake up to? Possibly some slippery conditions. Into tomorrow, Friday, though, we are seeing sunshine, high of 8 degrees. Also gusty winds, so we're looking at winds gusting all the way up to 60 kilometers per hour. As we get ahead into the weekend, though, I'm seeing some double digits in our future, and I'll be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Another government official has spoken out about the need to get more aid into Gaza. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says so many Palestinians need humanitarian aid right now, including food, water, and medical supplies. He says, however, that it's very difficult since there's no ceasefire in place. As Israeli forces advance on Gaza City, Lebanon's terrorist group Hezbollah is now joining Hamas in the war. It says it used 2 drones packed with explosives to attack an Israeli army post in a disputed area. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken will hold talks in Israel and Jordan on Friday after U.S. President Joe Biden suggested a humanitarian pause to let aid in and to let foreign nationals out. The Israeli military has released video of what it claims are operations taking place inside of Gaza. A number of Israeli troops are slowly advancing toward Gaza City, where the Israeli government says the terrorist group Hamas has a lot of its military structures set up and where many Hamas members are hiding among civilians.
לוחמי צה"ל ממשיכים להתקדם במרחב העיר עזה ומנהלים קרבות פנים אל פנים עם מחבלי החמאס ומעמיקים את הלחימה. במהלך הלילה הכוחות נלחמו מול מחבלים רבים שניסו לערוב להם. בתום קרב שערך כמה שעות וכלל לחימה ביבשה וסיוע אש מכלי טיס ומספינת טילים, מחבלים רבים נהרגו.
More and more images are being released of the devastation being experienced during the war with Israel and Hamas. Reports from the Middle East say more than 3,600 Palestinian children have died during the 3 weeks of fighting.
حال كنزي مثل حال كثير من الأطفال اللي تم استهدافهم، منهم بترت يعني قدمه، بترت ساقه، ومنهم من قطعت رأسه ومات بشكل أساسي. الوضع مأساوي كثير في قطاع غزة، خاصة في ظل عدم وجود حماية للمدنيين وعدم وجود مناطق آمنة للمدنيين، وإنه الاستهداف صار عشوائي لجميع المناطق بدون خطوط حمر، يعني لا مستشفى.
اجتها شطية في النخاع، قطعت النخاع، قطع قطعاته، يعني هل لقيت البنت فيش حركة خالص فيش. طب إيش ذنبها؟
Wayne King is a retired colonel with the Canadian Air Force. He joined us on Bridge City News recently to talk about the importance of wearing our poppies here as we honor our veterans leading up to Remembrance Day. But he also gave us his thoughts on the current wars taking place, including the one between Israel and Hamas in Gaza.
Israel deserves to be a sovereign, independent nation. The average citizen within the Gaza Strip and so on are not, in my knowledge and experience, a warlike group. They are hostage to the situation, and I certainly feel that they're being punished for the sins of other nations, and it's something that only through decisive international action, it can be resolved in a good manner.
Make sure you catch the full interview with retired Canadian Armed Forces Colonel Wayne King and myself coming up in the second half of our show. The federal government plans to level out the number of new permanent residents in Canada in 2026, forecasting an end to record-breaking year-over-year immigration. Immigration Minister Mark Miller submitted new targets for the next few years, which calls for the number of new permanent residents to hold steady at about 500,000 in 2026.
Under the plan, we will conduct skills missions abroad, importantly coordinated by a Chief International Talent Officer, to find the workers we need. We'll work to align our immigration programs and services more closely to the current and future needs of our economy. I would stress that following the announcement of yesterday on our strategic immigration review, what Canadians have been telling us is to plan a little better for the future of the country. We know these challenges and that these levels are essential because of the broad economic brushstrokes that I portrayed in the last few minutes. But what Canadians are telling us, what economists are telling us, is we have to dive into the microeconomic impacts of immigration. That means making sure our programs are properly tailored to what industry, what labor is asking us to do. And right now, I can't pretend that they are.
Lethbridge County is calling on the community to help fill the shelves of our local food banks this Christmas season. The county launched the Frozen Food Bank fundraiser in support of the Coaldale Food Bank and North County Interfaith Outreach Society in Picture Butte. It's on now until November 30th. Reeve Tori Campbell explains how this initiative works.
So you can make a non-perishable food donation or a monetary donation at our Lethbridge office here at 905 4th Avenue South at the Lethbridge County office. You can go into those two food bank locations and just let them know that you are trying to participate in the Frozen Food Bank initiative. Once you make your donation, you receive a ballot. Your ballot's entered into a draw, and we'll select, I believe, 10 winners is kind of what we're thinking. 10 winners will have the opportunity to dunk me in a dunk tank in the first part of December.
Back in 2020, Reeve Campbell and former councillor Steve Campbell both shaved their heads, raising more than $5,000 in food bank donations during the Christmas season. You know, it probably comes as no surprise that limited precipitation in 2023 has led to lower than typical water reserves across much of southern Alberta. The City of Lethbridge is carefully monitoring and taking proactive steps to ensure a sustained water supply for our region. Doug Kaup, General Manager of Water and Wastewater Services, explains what steps the city is taking to ensure that the taps don't run dry.
There's some physical things we're doing at the water treatment plant has a intake canal that carries the water from the bank of the river into the treatment plant, and we're having that dredged out often after flood events. That channel will silt up, and so we do maintenance post flood usually, but in anticipation of the potential for lower levels in the river, we want to make sure that hydraulic capacity is there. So we are doing some work in coming weeks to dredge the silt out of that canal.
You know, let's hope for lots and lots of moisture this winter. The excitement that comes with sporting events in Lethbridge can be seen, felt, and heard from the hearts of so many who reside in our city. And if you love basketball, you're in for a real treat next year. BCN's Naveen Day has that story.
This is something that we haven't seen here in Western Canada for some time, if not ever.
Kim Gallucci, the general manager of NMAC Centre, among others, struggled to contain their excitement during the announcement of an event that will allow fans to witness NCAA basketball at its finest right here in Lethbridge. His venue, along with Lethbridge College, will be the epicenter of the first ever Western Slam event, where 4 dynamic NCAA teams will engage in 6 intense games over 3 action-packed days. Jeff Dunlap with On Ice Entertainment, the firm that is organizing the event, says his company is launching a similar event in Moncton in about 2 weeks. And he gave the media an example of what kind of talent we can expect to see in Lethbridge next year.
Ended up getting Weber State, who's not too far from here, as well as Yale, Colgate, and Garner-Webb. So it's a very solid 4-team tournament. 3 of those 4 teams are picked to win their leagues. And if they win their leagues, if the predictions are right, they would go to the NCAA tournament and be a part of March Madness. So our goal, again, for here would be the exact same thing. We'd like to pick some of the area's best schools, bring them up here, expose them to your area and your community, get people excited about these teams, and then they could go on and follow them through the regular basketball season into January and February and see if they make the tournament.
Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Higgins said he couldn't believe what he was hearing when he got the news.
I honestly thought I was being pranked. The popularity of basketball, as I'm sure we all know, in southern Alberta makes this a huge win for the city of Lethbridge, both sports-wise and economy-wise. You think about the hotels, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the retail stores. I mean, literally everybody wins.
Some of these tournaments are very high profile, national television with ESPN or CBS Sports. And we are at the infancy stage of building, hopefully, events here in Canada headed in that direction.
The Western Slam event is scheduled to unfold from November 28th to 30th of 2024. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
How cool is that? NCAA basketball right here in Lethbridge next year. Wow. Certain areas of southwestern Alberta saw a little bit of moisture today, but the rain cloud should be leaving us as warmer temperatures are on the horizon. A full look at the weather forecast is on deck. Some areas here in southwestern Alberta saw a little bit of moisture. Jeanette Roche is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it appears as though things should clear up and the mercury will be climbing as we make our way to the weekend.
Yeah, in fact, we could see a double-digit day in there, Hal, and there it is right there on Sunday with lots of sunshine. Before we get there, though, we could still see a little bit of rain this evening, -4 for an overnight low. Into Friday, we're looking at 8 degrees, clear skies, so the sun will shine again. Mainly cloudy, though, on Saturday, 9 degrees for a high, and then there's that 12 degrees. Lovely on Sunday, looking at sunshine, looking forward to that. That should last into Monday with a high of 9 degrees, 9 degrees also expected on Tuesday, and then 7 for a high on Wednesday with a mix of sun and clouds. So we are kind of sticking in that range there with the average high for this time of year, 8 degrees. Average low, -4, 23. That was our record high on this day. That happened back in 1981. And in 1991, 10 years later, look what happened there. Record low, -25. Okay, sunrise this morning, rather, 8 to 22 a.m. and the sunset this evening at 6:07. So we're looking at 9 hours and 45 minutes of daylight, 4 minutes shorter than yesterday. As we get to Victoria tomorrow, 13 for a high, looking at 30% chance of showers, then clearing 40% for a 40% chance of showers. In Vancouver, looking at a high of 12, 7 for a high. In Edmonton, looking at 60% chance of flurries. Calgary seeing a mix of sun and cloud, 20 to 40 winds, and a high of 8 degrees. As we get on over into the rest of the prairies, seeing some fog patches, a bit of fogginess, dissipating in the morning, though, for both the Saskatoon and Regina. Saskatoon sitting at 0 tomorrow, -2 for a high expected in Regina. Could see a bit of flurries. Winnipeg looking at 1 degree with a mix of sun and cloud and could see a 15-kilometer-per-hour wind. Toronto a little bit windy tomorrow, 20 to 40 winds, mix of sun and cloud, though, 11 degrees. Looking at those double digit there. 9 degrees for a high in Ottawa with a mix of sun and cloud. Montreal seeing a high of 11 degrees and very windy, looking at 30 to 60 kilometer-per-hour winds there. As we look to Fredericton, seeing mainly sunny skies, high of 9 degrees. 9 for a high in Halifax. Now, Halifax is actually expecting about 5 millimeters of rain. So there you go. 9 for a high in Charlottetown tomorrow with mainly clear skies, and clear skies also expected in St. John's with a little bit of rain later on expected in the day. High of 6 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Starbucks is reporting record fourth quarter revenue after opening hundreds of new stores. The Seattle-based coffee giant says sales for the July to September period rose 11% to $9.4 billion US. Global same-store sales, or sales at stores open at least a year, rose 8%. Analysts were forecasting a 6.8% increase. Starbucks net income rose 39% to $1.2 billion, or $1.06 per share. Sales edged higher for Maple Leaf Foods, which trimmed its losses in its latest quarter. The company's reporting a loss of $4.3 million in its third quarter. That compares to a loss of almost $230 million a year ago. That's when the company took a large one-time non-cash impairment charge related to its plant protein business. Maple Leaf officials say the third quarter totaled $1.25 billion compared to $1.23 billion a year earlier. Canada's top banker says the central bank stood pat on its key interest rate because of the effect that upcoming mortgage renewals is expected to have on the economy. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem appeared before a Senate committee on Wednesday following the bank's most recent interest rate decision and monetary policy report. He said the central bank maintained the 5% policy rate because it knows the effect of previous rate hikes are still filtering through the economy. As more people renew their mortgages at higher interest rates, households are feeling the squeeze more directly, leading to more softness in the economy. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 547 points on the day to finish at 19,626. The Dow was up 564 points to 33,839. The S&P 500 was up 79 on the day to 4317, and the Nasdaq was up 232 points to 13,294. West Texas Intermediate oil was up 206 on the day to 82.50 US per barrel. Natural gas was up a cent to 3.51 US. Gold was up 2.96 to 19.8550 US an ounce, and silver was down 19 cents to 22.76 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.30 per bushel, barley's at $7.30, canola's at $15.51, and corn is at $8.58 per bushel. Live cattle December contract was up $1.05 to $184.68. Feeder cattle were up $4.05 to $242.63, and lean hogs December contract was up $3.13 to $73.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $72.80 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, a Lethbridge man was sentenced to life in prison or 25 years for killing his wife last year. 60-year-old David Ragland pleaded guilty to one count of second-degree murder and will not be eligible for parole for 13 and a half years. The court heard that Ragland stabbed his wife Shelley at their home on December 27th of 2022 while their grandchildren were playing nearby. Coming up, a one-on-one chat with retired Canadian Air Force Colonel Wayne King, who will give us his thoughts on the wars going on in Ukraine and Gaza, along with the importance of poppies as we make our way to Remembrance Day. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, check out our website, bridgecitynews.ca.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Kickstart your holiday preparations by visiting the First Baptist Church in Lethbridge's Art, Craft, and Bake Sale on Saturday, November 4th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at 1614 5th Avenue South. Find everything from knitting to crocheting to baked goods, woodwork, art pieces, ornaments, and all kinds of crafted items. Come join the festivities at the second annual Christmas tree lighting event on Friday, November 17th, taking place in Festival Square at 5 p.m. Enjoy live music, pictures with Santa Claus, free cookie decorating, and feel the spirit of the holiday as the 18-foot Christmas tree is lit up for the season. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program is taking place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Remembrance Day, lest we forget. It's a time to remember the many sacrifices paid by our soldiers to allow us to enjoy the freedoms we have today. It's also a time to review how our society and government treats our veterans and their families. Now, joining us now to discuss this is Wayne King, a retired Canadian Forces Colonel and Service Officer for the Lethbridge Royal Canadian Legion. Wayne, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much.
Now, when did you first enlist in the armed forces, and what really motivated you to get involved?
Well, I enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force in 1959. A different era, a different world at that time. My initial motivation, I must admit, was not necessarily for the broader reasons, but I was very, very interested in flying, and particularly the then modern aircraft, things like Spitfires, Mustangs, aircraft like that. But the world has changed a great deal since that time.
Did you ever become Top Gun? Like reference to that movie?
No, I never did. I initially, after I spent some time training, and then my first operational tour was with Air Defense Command, flying what was a very modern aircraft then, the CF-101 Voodoo. And I flew those in Bagotville, Quebec for a number of years.
Where are some of the other places you got to serve over the years, Wayne?
Pretty much all across Canada, except on each coast. Although I spent time on each coast for various operational requirements, it was mostly in Canada until the early 1970s, and I had a tour in the United States, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, where the mission was strategic transport on a worldwide mission. So while I was serving there, I spent many hours, days, weeks, both in the Middle East as well as South and North America, the Far East, pretty much all over the world, and then returned to Canada.
Let's talk a bit about that relationship between the Canadian and U.S. military and how far back it goes and how important it is to this day.
Well, it is extremely important, not only in terms of our membership and participation in NATO, but extremely important for the Canadian military, in that we, as a consequence, have access to an awful lot of experience, knowledge, capability within the United States military structure that tends to multiply or strengthen the effect and the contribution that Canada makes to world peace.
Wayne, war is never pleasant, but many people believe that it's often necessary to really fight for our freedoms. What are your thoughts right now on the ongoing war in Ukraine? And how about the war between Israel and Hamas right now in Gaza?
Those two situations, although separate locations in the structure, both in the Middle East, but they are linked in many subtle ways. The Ukrainian war is one which I certainly hope is resolved successfully in terms of expelling Russia from Ukraine and allowing Ukraine to resume its status as an independent, free, and democratic nation within the world structure. There is no reason, in my view, why Russia decided to invade and take over a good portion of the Ukraine territory. They may have had some squabbles, but that doesn't mean that they have the liberty and the right to assume ownership and sovereigns over what is an independent nation. My difficulty with the Russian invasion is that unless it is stopped in a very decisive and internationally supported manner, any political temporary halt to the war will only represent a short-term pause, allowing the Russian military and nation to rearm, restructure, reorganize, and come again whenever they feel strong enough to do it. It's time to get the situation resolved and resolved in a positive, long-lasting manner. Whether this will happen, I don't know. As far as the Hamas versus Israeli situation, this whole thing has been a proxy war from other Middle Eastern nations. And certainly when Israel is attacked by, in an unknown manner, unwarranted manner, they have every right to defend themselves. And there is, I think, the onus on the international community, whether through the UN or other national organizations, to seek a permanent and long-lasting solution. Israel deserves to be a sovereign, independent nation. The average citizen within the Gaza Strip and so on are not, in my knowledge and experience, a warlike group. They are hostage to the situation, and I certainly feel that they're being punished for the sins of other nations, and it's something that only through decisive international action it can be resolved in a good manner.
So, Wayne, what was your reaction like? I want to circle back to Ukraine for just a moment here. When that former Ukrainian officer who fought for the Nazis in the Second World War, I believe his name was Yaroslav Hunka, was honored in the House of Commons. Everybody stood up, gave him a standing ovation. That many people didn't even realize he was a former Nazi. What was your reaction like when you found out that our Canadian politicians were doing that?
Well, my reaction, like many Canadians, was that it represented a very dark blot on our international image. To recognize and celebrate an individual in our parliament who had that kind of a background, that kind of a linkage with the group that we fought a World War II over, is one which gave me a great deal of concern, and I think a majority of Canadians felt that it was something that never should have happened. Why this situation was not properly vetted in the first case, I don't know. I'm not a politician. I don't know how the ins and outs, the day-to-day activities occur, but clearly the ball was dropped, and very badly dropped.
So, Wayne, let's talk about the poppy for just a moment. It means so much to so many people, but what does it mean for you as a veteran?
The poppy is now an internationally recognized symbol of our recognition, our acknowledgement of the sacrifice that many of our veterans have made throughout the ages, dating back many years before Canada was a nation, in fact. And it represents the sacrifice of so many to preserve and enable us as individual Canadians to enjoy the freedoms and the benefits that we are able to do so. So many in the world right now, whether they're reduced to a status of poverty in refugee camps or under the gun in some situations like the average citizens in Ukraine, they don't enjoy the kind of freedoms that we have. And I think that those who adhere to the use of the poppy or the recognition of the poppy should, at the very least, whether they wish to support the actual military activities of the nation, if they accept and wear a poppy, then they are at least recognizing the contribution of so many veterans to our society.
So when people buy a poppy, Wayne, to support our veterans, where does the money go?
Well, to begin with, that's a bit of a misnomer. We don't sell poppies. The Legion has never sold a poppy throughout the duration of its existence. The poppies are available for free, really. They're presented to the General Society through poppy boxes distributed throughout the community. So any thought that you buy a poppy is a bit of a misnomer. Certainly, we gratefully receive any contribution, any donation that individual citizens may wish to make to the support of veterans. And those funds are initially placed in trust at the various branches throughout the country, and then used to support veterans where there is financial need, where there is assistance that can be provided that society otherwise doesn't necessarily have available. But we don't sell poppies, but we certainly encourage all citizens to wear the poppy during the Remembrance Day period.
Yeah, and let's make donations to support our veterans and their families.
Yes.
So, Wayne,
Yeah.
where and when will the Remembrance Day service be held in Lethbridge, and what can people really expect when they attend?
There are two locations that Remembrance Day ceremonies can be observed. First of all, in the new facilities out at the exhibition grounds. This is the first year that the celebration or the Remembrance Day ceremony will be held in that building. And we would ask any who wish to attend to be in place by 10:40 in the morning. And there we will have a temporary cenotaph set up and bring on some of the representative groups within our community, the youth, of course, and then led by other groups like police, fire, veterans themselves, and other associated groups. The second ceremony will be at the cenotaph adjacent to City Hall. And both ceremonies will be keyed to focus on the armistice declared at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November in 1918. The ceremony at City Hall or at the cenotaph will be highlighted by a bit of a fly past by one of our local citizens who has the privilege of owning and flying a World War II trainer aircraft, the Harvard, that was collectively known as the Yellow Peril, and a very challenging aircraft to learn to fly and to master, but it will be present and will fly past hopefully right at 11 o'clock. Unfortunately, we will not see the C-17 aircraft. It's rather all the aircraft available to Canada, all 5 of them, are either in long-term maintenance or deployed on international support for our military overseas.
Wayne, the Canadian military recently issued a directive that instructs chaplains to remove any religious symbols from their uniforms to ensure that any prayers be inclusive during any official public events. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts would be just personal thoughts in regard to that. I have always held and continue to do so that Canada is a Christian nation. And I feel it is extremely important that we continue that legacy. I recognize that Christianity is not the only religion in the world, and individuals have the right to practice their own religion. And I don't object to that, nor do I suggest that it should be otherwise. But again, I can only express my own personal opinion. And that is that Canada, being what I feel is a Christian nation, should follow that particular objective.
Now, Wayne, officials with the Canadian Armed Forces say there's a real shortage of personnel, and they're having a real hard time getting new recruits. Why do you think that is?
A variety of reasons, I believe. First of all, Canada, unfortunately, is not a nation that overtly supports the existence and employment of the military. I believe that in the main, they do so because of international pressure, not because they think it's necessarily the right and proper thing to do in support of democratic societies around the world. At a time when we continue to operate with equipment which is 50 plus years old, equipment that in truth belongs more in the museum than it does on a modern battlefield. Any young individual who might be contemplating a career in the military, seeing that, I think quite rightly can gain the impression that the country as a whole really has no particular objective to support the military and to support those in uniform. And at a time when we struggle to see the kind of support for our veterans coming through the government, again, it's a bit of a difficult sell to the youth of our society to say that, yeah, this is something that is worthwhile pursuing.
Wayne King is a retired Canadian Forces colonel and surface officer for the Royal Canadian Legion here in Lethbridge. Wayne, thanks so much for your service and for your time today.
You're welcome.
Well, if you're a news junkie and are used to getting your news and information in your social media feeds, you've obviously noticed the big change this year. That news is now absent on Facebook and Instagram, and you've been forced to go elsewhere for your information. Recent censorship of Canadian news by tech giants have been the consequence of the passage of Bill C-18 this past June. But there is an organization dedicated to upholding the online rights and freedoms of Canadians. Joining us for an in-depth discussion on this matter is Matt Hatfield, the campaign director, actually the executive director at Open Media. Welcome, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us today to shed some light on this very significant issue.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Matt, maybe start off by sharing with us what Bill C-18 is, if we don't already know, and why was it tabled to begin with?
So Bill C-18 is kind of a complicated scheme that is supposed to take money from tech giants and reward it to news outlets. There are versions of a proposal like that where the government would have just made a fund and distributed money from the fund. The government decided not to do that. And their idea was essentially to force both parties to the negotiating table. So they would set a bunch of terms of like, your deals have to look like this, that, and the other. And we are going to require you to reach deals with any number of news companies. And the platforms had the choice of saying, well, we're just not going to carry any news. And Facebook's decided they're not. And Google may follow suit.
Right, which is really unfortunate. So we have the federal government here telling Facebook and, well, I guess it was Meta and Google and, Twitter, I guess, that this is how the terms are going to be. So, I mean, I guess what happened was what most of us sort of expected was going to happen. I don't know why the federal government didn't have that foresight, but here we are. And so, unfortunately, you're saying Google might follow suit now, meaning that we're not going to get news on Google?
Yeah, so, there's some detail to how each of them do it. So the way Meta's done it, they've chosen to block all news in Canada. So you actually can't even get news from outside of Canada, which those news outlets outside of Canada wouldn't have been compensated in any case. Meta doesn't really see themselves as being in the business of sharing news. It is a bit different with Google. It's more important to Google. But Google seems to be signaling that they're still not happy with the bill and are still going to just stop providing links to news on their search engine instead of complying with it.
Okay, interesting. And what do you think if the bill were somehow rescinded? What do you think would happen? Do you think that we could go back to getting news on social? Do you think too much damage has been done at this point?
I think there's still room for government to make a deal with Google, even keeping the bill. Certainly, if they pulled it, I think Google would stay, keep news. I don't think Facebook's going to come back in any environment. I think Meta fundamentally doesn't believe news is a big part of what their platform should be, and the government simply misunderstood that.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. We all know by now what the response has been from Meta, Instagram, other tech giants. But what kind of an impact has this bill had on Canadian media and news online? I know for us it's been pretty harsh.
Yeah, I mean, there's outlets that have lost half their business with having Meta not sharing their traffic, which is a huge problem for many media outlets that were already struggling. For the end user, it comes up sometimes and not others. I know during the wildfires, a lot of people were complaining that they weren't getting good news on Meta platforms, and that is an issue. On the other hand, we've also heard from a lot of people that are saying, overall, maybe it's better on Facebook these days. I didn't like it when everyone was always fighting on news articles. So I think Meta's going to stick to their guns on that front, but it's sure doing a lot of damage to the viability of Canadian news.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I do remember the fires you're talking about because, I mean, it was almost a safety issue. If people could have gotten something in their feed, they would have known, what direction to go or what was even happening. Instead, they have to now download or upload people's apps, download their apps, and rely on just other ways to get their information. It's unfortunate. So, Matt, I want to talk about your organization now, Open Media. How is Open Media addressing these challenges posed by this legislation?
Yeah, so we've been pointing out to the government this wouldn't work from the start. I think there's a debate to have about how we support journalism in Canada. Some people think the government needs to play more of a role, provide funding. Many people, of course, are very worried about the government, picking winners and losers in journalism. Unfortunately, C18 kind of combines the worst of every approach. The government was playing a pretty big role in how this funding would be distributed and who might benefit, but they weren't sort of taking responsibility for the consequences. And it's been disappointing to see the government still isn't really taking responsibility for the fact that not only have they not produced any new news funding at all, there's not a single new dollar so far, but they're actually hurting a lot of news outlets, which surely wasn't the point. So we are calling them on to go back to the drawing board and come back with something that actually helps the news, because this just isn't doing it.
So in your opinion, what's the best way to fight against media censorship in Canada, considering the evolving digital landscape and the challenges that it presents?
Yeah, so we encourage everyone to have a direct relationship with your news sources that you value. People should be coming direct to your website, subscribed to your newsletters, really making sure that these platforms aren't cutting them out, aren't the intermediary. And that's just healthier for all of us. If people do want to see news on some of their platforms, you can use a VPN to spoof that you're outside of Canada. And that's a way of sort of changing your what shows up in your feed. Although you still can't post to people who aren't using a VPN, so it's not going to help with news on that angle. And really, you got to raise your voice and be heard by government. So many more people are talking about the problems of this kind of approach to news now than were a year ago, before Meta started blocking things. And so we have petitions that you can take on openmedia.ca or .org, where you can really tell government, this isn't working. It's time for you to admit it and come back with something better. Let this bill go and support news in a different way.
This is one of the worst cases of censorship that I've seen online, but do you believe that censorship in Canada is becoming worse? Even before this happened?
It's a complicated question. I think the government is becoming much more involved in regulation in different ways of the internet, and I don't think that they are necessarily trying to set up sort of a censorship regime, but sometimes the things they are doing have censorship consequences. So if you look at Bill C-11 on the online streaming front, for a long, long time, they've been saying, we're not going to touch user content. User content's going to be left alone. And we've been saying, okay, but the way you've written the bill, user content could be affected. And there's been, a long debate there. And they have tried to fix parts of that in the regulations they put on C-11, but it's now in the hands of the CRTC. And the CRTC has a very specific old school way of looking at things. And they are going to do things that actually are going to have speech consequences for ordinary Canadians. They've decided that podcasts are potentially subject to regulation, and they're looking at a broad range of quote-unquote broadcasting objectives they want to see podcasts fulfilling. And we're still waiting to see exactly how that's going to play out, but I'm concerned about the way they're thinking about the internet, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. Matt, are there any other specific legislations that Open Media is currently opposing?
Yeah, there's a lot going on. So there's privacy regulation happening, Bill C-27, and the government has shoehorned regulating artificial intelligence into that bill. We don't think we should be handling both issues at the same time, but getting that right is going to be really important, because we're all seeing ChatGPT and all these tools that are going to change the world a lot, I think, over the next 5 years. And then another really exciting piece that's going on right now is there's some signs that Canada might improve our competition legislation. So there's actually been a couple bills from different parties in the last few months proposing to deeply reform our competition laws. And people might think, competition law sounds boring, snooze. Competition law defines the terms of how business works in Canada. And it basically means, are we going to be a country that's fair to small business? Or are we going to be a country where the giants get to just abuse their power and crush small businesses before they get a chance to compete? So that's a really important piece to get right that I'm actually hopeful for.
Wow. For individuals looking to become more involved in discussions against censorship, what are the most effective ways to contribute and maybe make a difference?
You got to raise your voice. Contacting your local MP's office matters a lot. There's contact emails that you can find on government websites. You can use our petitions. Be polite. Don't swear at people. They tune out. But let them know that supporting free expression is really important to you. And, you might think, oh, like, I'm just one person. Do they really care? When an MP's office hears from a few dozen, a few hundred people, it absolutely makes a difference. And they realize they can't ignore Canadians.
Definitely. Okay, so switching gears here just a tiny bit regarding private members Bill C-352, which has entered its first reading. What potential impacts could it have on monopolies in Canada?
Yeah, so this is a competition reform proposal, and we think it's one of the best ones that's out there right now. So essentially, there are many different ways in which a big company can abuse their power to mess up the little guy in Canada, to set the terms such that you're never going to get a fair shot at having your business succeed. And we see companies that have a market dominant position like Amazon do it. We see tech companies like Google do it in search. But we also see it like really at a local level. There's some great reporting out there right now talking about how even things like veterinarians are being rolled up by these Canadian monopolies that gradually buy, small local business after business, and don't compete fairly, and frankly don't serve their customers very well. And so essentially what this regulation will do is it will give our Competition Bureau, which is the primary regulator here, a lot more power to look at markets, decide if a couple of big companies are using unfair practices this way, and take steps to prevent that. So many people were very upset when Rogers successfully bought Shaw. We are fighting to keep Canada from seeing another buyout like that again, because everyone could see that was bad for the country, and our laws just couldn't stop it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like it's becoming more regulated. Absolutely. So how does Open Media, your organization, plan to engage with this legislation specifically?
Yeah, we've been engaging really hard from the start. And I think, we're in a very polarized time, but something like the peril of monopolies is something that actually the whole political spectrum understands. People on the left and the right, everyone can see that it's bad for people when one or two companies hold all the cards. So we've worked really hard with the opposition parties to give them input on what needs to change. We've worked a lot with academics and experts on this, and we've really rallied our community. So we've got what's called an anti-monopoly charter that lays out some basic principles for what Canada needs to do to stop monopolies from taking over. And we're asking people to read it, if you like it, endorse it, and get your voice out and make sure people know it's not just 1,000 or 10,000 people saying this. It's actually, our polling suggests it's the vast majority of Canadians want to see action on monopolies.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we definitely don't want to see them taking over the media landscape, that's for sure. Okay, well, how can people actively support your organization's efforts to keep the internet open and affordable and surveillance-free?
Raise your voice, and of course, if you have money to give, that helps too. You can visit openmedia.org, but really just check out our community, learn more about the issues, and be a part of it. Because the number one thing that allows this kind of stuff to pass unchallenged is when people don't speak up. It really makes a difference when they hear from people.
Okay, so in your experience, you're thinking that public awareness and advocacy, it really goes a long way in playing and shaping policies related to digital rights?
Yep, it can prevent the worst from happening, and it can defend the best.
Oh, interesting. Can you maybe share details about other projects that Open Media is working on to advance digital rights globally?
Yeah, I mean, we're fighting for privacy and competition reform, and we're fighting to prevent, I think, some of the worst, most censorious ideas from happening. So a major piece that I think is going to come out next year that isn't legislation yet is online harms legislation. So, we all know there's some terrible stuff on the internet, and most of us would like to see less of it. But if you put the wrong laws in place around that, you can actually censor a lot of legitimate speech and even prevent reporting on some of these issues that need to be discussed and unveiled. So the government's first take at online harms legislation we saw 2 years ago. It was very bad. It actually would have made all of us part of a surveillance web, essentially, for the RCMP and CSIS. We stopped that. And we're going to see if they've done better on their next proposal or if we need to fight them again. And that's coming next year.
Wow, what an important job you have there for sure. And it sounds like you've done some work in other countries as well.
Yeah, so Open Media does work in the US as well. We've done work in Europe as well in the past. And I've personally I have a background in free expression work around the world. And, we might think we're a democracy, we're safe. There's a lot of democracies that slide. And you go from full democracy to a bit less to a bit less. There's a lot of places between Canada and China you can end up that aren't good for your freedoms.
So looking ahead, what are Open Media's long-term goals and aspirations in the fight for internet freedom, and how can concerned citizens contribute meaningfully to these goals?
Number one thing, when there's something that you're upset about or that you're concerned about, let your MP know. That really is the core of it. In terms of what we're fighting for longer term, people are being progressively disempowered by technology. Every year, more of our life is run by technology and we understand it less. And that's not just, we're getting older, we don't understand what the buttons do. That's really tech companies running our lives in ways that benefit them and not us. And so we're fighting to set the terms of our lives with tech companies to make sure that our devices are accountable to us, our privacy and data is owned by us, and we can make choices about our lives that are actually the choices we want and not just, being trapped in a doom loop of scrolling the feed and, I'll look at another cat video and another cat video. Maybe I don't want to do that, and I need a bit more control over that experience.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks so much for joining us today, Matt, and enjoyed having you on.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Absolutely. Matt Hatfield is the executive director at Open Media, an organization dedicated to upholding the online rights and freedoms of Canadians. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.